Maybe we'll start with just kind of an umbrella about detox and the gut. And as I was researching, I realized there was really some holes in my knowledge here. I think like probably like you started or a lot of people start, when I was learning about the gut, I was learning about the microbiome and the immune system in the gut and the barrier. But the detoxification system of the gut, there's a lot of facets there. And it's really like our number one line of defense, because mostly, well, we breathe in toxins too and get them on the skin, but mostly we're ingesting them.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those are chemical toxins, man-made toxins, and some of those are endotoxins made by infections. And I would say that was a little bit more of my specialty in understanding the gut too. Just how do we work with toxins that, infections? But the gut also does quite a bit for detoxing different drugs and glyphosate. And, I feel like I'm really just scratching the surface of it all. So maybe just give us your kind of impression or your introduction to how the gut supports detoxification for us.
Yeah, so like with most things in the gut, there's a very important dichotomy for people to understand, right? So a healthy gut is not only supports detoxification, but is an integral part of detoxification. And we'll talk about how that is. So you really can't effectively detox without a healthy gut, right? So it's an integral part of the detoxification process. And I'm talking about all methods of toxins, whether it's endotoxins, exotoxins, xenotoxins, whatever it may be, the gut plays a role there. But here's the part that's really important to understand, is that a dysfunctional gut not only then does not allow for proper detoxification, but will add to the toxicity in the body, right? That's where it's so important for people to understand the gut, because it's not like, okay, my gut is, a little bit messed up, so my detox system is compromised. It's my gut is even a little bit messed up, my detox system is compromised, and on top of that, my toxic load is almost doubled because my gut is messed up, right? So when I do a gut-brain talks, for example, I really try to emphasize to people that not only is the gut critical for the normal function of the brain, and it can be the most supportive component to the brain, but if a dysbiotic gut exists, it could be the most toxic thing to the brain. So the gut is either your worst enemy or your best friend, right? And there's a big spectrum then, right? So most people are moving towards the gut being their worst enemy all the time. What we need to do is try to pull your gut back towards it being your best friend. Because when it supports in ways that there's nothing else physiologically can support. And when it causes problems that are so profound that it becomes the biggest driver of chronic illness. So we need to understand that in the detox system too. And when I'm going to talk about both of them. So first, if it's okay with you, let me talk about how a dysfunctional gut actually increases toxic load, right?
Okay.
Because that's the part people really need to appreciate. So a dysfunctional gut, number one, if you have a dysbiotic gut, meaning you have overgrown, opportunistic organisms, pathogens, you have too many of the wrong kind of microbes, not enough of the right kind. And we can talk about general ideas of what the wrong and right kind seem to be like, right? But let's say you are dysbiotic that way. Typically, what that also means is your gut is leaky. And what it also means is there's a lot of inflammatory responses going on in the lining of your gut. When your microbiome population is imbalanced, your immune response in the lining of the gut, which is where the vast majority of your immune tissue is, that becomes dysfunctional as well, right? So your immune system is not functioning properly. You've got lots and lots of inflammation going on in the lining of the gut, which then also translates to the rest of the system. So step one in detoxification is we count on our liver, right? We need toxins to make their way to the liver, because the liver starts the whole process of phase one detoxification. In order for anything that enters your system, especially through your digestive tract, to get to the liver, it has to go past the gut microbiome, the mucosal layer, and the intestinal epithelium, right? And one of the things that occurs as toxins go through those is good, healthy, friendly microbes actually metabolize it to a certain degree. right? So that what is ending up going to the liver is actually less of a toxic burden than what was entering into the body, right? So imagine a toxin enters into the body through the digestive tract. When it gets to the gut, it goes through this filter system where the gut microbiome to a certain degree breaks it down, detoxifies it to a certain degree, and then some of the components end up in the liver, and then the liver does its job. If your gut is leaky and inflamed and the mucosa is damaged and the lining is opened up, then all of the purity of that toxin is moving right through without that first part of the cleansing from the microbiome. So every toxin that enters your body presents its full toxic load to your liver rather than going through a screen that reduces some of the toxic load, right? So that's one way in which a dysfunctional gut microbiome can increase the toxicity in your body. The second way is a lot of dysfunctional microbes will actually convert compounds into even more toxigenic compounds in your system, right? There are microbes in your gut that can take heavy metals and methylate them and make them even more toxic for your system, right? They can convert things like TMAO, for example, into more toxic versions of TMA. So they can take things that are already toxigenic, metabolize them in such a way that they become even more carcinogenic, even more toxigenic in your system. So that's a second way in which a dysfunctional microbiome makes things even worse, right? So again, remember, this is not just, oh, it's compromising your detox system, it's actually making things worse for you. Number three, the microbes, the dysfunctional microbes in the system can themselves produce toxigenic compounds, right? They produce toxins all the time, whether it's to increase diarrhea, diuretics, and things like that. They do all kinds of things. They can even create toxic neurotransmitters that can make you anxious and panic. So they produce a whole host of toxins in your system. So now not only is your liver and your phase 2 and phase 3 detox systems dealing with toxins that are coming in from the outside world, but you've got this massive toxin producing factory in your gut itself. So it's more than doubling your total toxigenic load, right? So that's a third way in which it makes things worse. Then the fourth way is inflammation that occurs within the gut mucosa because of the dysbiosis. Remember, I mentioned earlier, when your gut is dysfunctional, you tend to have higher amounts of inflammation going on in the mucosa because your immune system is constantly sending in innate immune responders to that area because it's confused about what's going on. It feels like there's an infection happening. The toxigenic load is high, so it's continuously recruiting inflammatory immune cells to that area. Inflammatory immune cells do a number of things. Number one, it damages your own tissues further. So the intestines become more and more and more permeable, so more toxins actually leak through without going through a screen. And then the other problem with it is your immune system starts to react egregiously to all of these things entering your body. And that can get translated throughout the body. So not only do you have a toxic load in parts of your body, but now you've got systemic immune inflammation as well, right? So that's another way in which a dysfunctional microbiome will actually enhance the toxicity. And then the last way, the most passive way is, as it turns out, we need our healthy, friendly, diverse microbes to produce our phase 2 enzymes for us, or at least induce the production of the phase 2 enzymes, the methylation enzymes, the hydroxylation enzymes, all of these different enzymes that are responsible for the important phase of detoxification. The studies are pretty clear. When you have dysbiosis or low levels of microbes, you produce less of those enzymes. So the ability of your natural systems to detoxify gets compromised, right? So now you're increasing your toxic load, your immune system's haywire, the screening portion of your gut is messed up, so things are just entering directly towards your liver. Your microbiome's producing even more toxins than you're even exposed to. And then finally, your ability to actually detoxify is compromised because you don't have the right microbes stimulating the production of those important detoxifying enzymes, right? So that is how a messed up gut. So if you have IBS, so you've got GI issues, you have food intolerances, you bloat, you have SIBO, you've got immune dysfunctions, you have a hard time sleeping, you get anxiety, skin issues. All of these things are all signs of a dysfunctional gut. And that means your dysfunctional gut, not only is it compromising your ability to detox, but it's significantly enhancing the toxigenic status of your system, right? So it's not only not helping you, it's making things worse. So that's the part that's really important to understand. Now let's talk about how a healthy gut helps you detoxify things, right? So number one, maintaining a healthy gut lining is absolutely critical because it acts as a physical barrier to slow down and even trap toxins that are trying to enter into your bloodstream or into your liver, right? The more the mucus layer can capture and just take it out of your system, because your mucus layer is constantly being sloughed off from the top and then you defecate it, right? So you poop it out. So the more toxins that can get trapped in that mucus layer and just get taken out of the body, the better it is, because your liver doesn't have to deal with it, your gallbladder doesn't have to deal with it, your immune system doesn't have to deal with it, and so on. So we want a good, strong, healthy barrier system, including a nice thick mucosa layer, so that can trap a lot of toxins that are coming in and not even have to allow your body doesn't even have to deal with them, right? So that's one way where a healthy gut microbiome that maintains a really healthy barrier can help you with detoxification. The second one is, the fact that the microbiome screens things. So as things are trying to go through the mucosa where the microbiome lives, there are lots of microbes in your system that can break down toxins to non-toxigenic compounds, right? For example, glyphosate, there's bacillus that has been shown to be able to break down glyphosate, or the active ingredient in Roundup, into non-toxic compounds. Most recently, there are microbes that are found near sulfur mines that have been shown to be able to break down the toxigenic version of sulfur into its molecular elements, right? So they can take heavy metals, bind up heavy metals, and take it out of the system. We're actually launching a product sometime in the next 3-4 months where it's a bacteria that can bind heavy metals in your GI tract for you. It binds arsenic, lead, and cadmium. And it does that by just running into those heavy metals and grabbing onto it. And then when it binds those heavy metals, it actually takes it out of your system through defecation, right? So it's a really powerful way of specifically grabbing heavy metals without affecting any other minerals or any other things that you might, if you use charcoal or clay and things like that, you're grabbing lots of stuff on the way out, including good things, right? So this becomes a highly specific way of grabbing just the problematic heavy metals and then taking it out of the system. And it's a bacteria that does it, right? So there are microbes in your gut microbiome that are designed to have an affinity for heavy metals and actually bind that stuff up and not allow it to enter into your system. So they can metabolize toxins that are coming in into harmless forms. They can bind up toxins that are coming in. At the same time, in the mucosa, if you have a healthy microbiome and it creates a nice healthy mucosa, lots of the toxins get trapped in that mucosa layer and doesn't even enter into the system. So those are a couple ways in which a healthy microbiome can enhance. Now, the other ways, your first phase, your cytochrome P450 pathway, that is actually enhanced by a diverse, healthy microbiome. Studies show that your upregulation of cytochrome P450 pathway can be done by microbes in your gut as they sense things like toxins coming in, right? They are your first line of defense. They are the ones, the microbes are the ones that are seeing what is entering into the body first, before your body even sees it, right? And so when the microbes that are there, friendly, helping you, working for you, when they start recognizing toxins coming into the system, they help you upregulate your phase 1 detox system, right? So that's really important. Now, at the same time, there are microbes in the gut that also upregulate your phase 2 and phase 3 detox systems in the body as well. They can enhance the production of those enzymes. The enzymes that do the sulfonification, the enzymes that do the hydroxylation and so on, right? The methylation, all of those processes. There are a number and series of enzymes that do all of that in phase 1 and phase 2. The microbiome enhances the expression of those enzymes. So the microbiome produces signals to tell your body to start producing more of those types of enzymes. Because again, the microbiome are your eyes and ears for what's entering into the system, especially through the digestive tract, but predominantly through the rest of the body as well. So those are really important functions. Now, of course, the microbiome also controls the enterohepatic circulation, the circulation between the gut and then the liver through the portal vein, right? So the microbiome can package things, can neutralize things, can send things to the liver in such a way that actually makes it easier for the liver to detoxify and neutralize those compounds to get rid of it from the body, right? So the microbiome plays a role hand in hand with your natural detox system if your microbiome is healthy, diverse, and functioning. And if your microbiome is not healthy, diverse, and functioning, not only does it not support your detox system, it dramatically enhances the toxicity in your body. So that's the part I think that's really important for people to understand, and why you cannot overlook the role of the microbiome when you're talking about detox, especially in this highly toxigenic environment that we all live in, right? We're getting exposed to so much stuff that every single day, without our knowledge, most of it, that create high amounts of toxicity in our system. And for us, we need to know that our microbiome plays a critical role in helping us deal with those. But if we allow our microbiome to be dysfunctional, it's dramatically enhancing the toxicity in our system.
Great point, which I think is, yeah, most people in the modern world right now, right, have this dysbiotic gut. We've talked mostly about the microbiome, but there are also other components of the gut. You mentioned the brain earlier. I'm a big believer in like optimizing your brain function to make sure you have gut motility, that kind of a thing. So we're going to kind of focus on the microbiome today in a sense, but there are a lot of components of good health that encourage having bowel movements and all this stuff. Yeah, I really just learned today that those P450 enzymes existed in the gut. And I was like, what? How did I not know this all the time? Yeah. I was super excited. So I'm so glad you're familiar with all this. It's so nice that I can just throw stuff at you and you're like, oh yeah.
Well, and here's the other thing, another one that, and I think we've talked about this on your program before, but short chain fatty acids, right, are so important for so many things in the system. I can go on and on and on of how important short chain fatty acids are. But short chain fatty acids also play a really important role in which is a byproduct of bacterial fermentation in your large bowel, and this increases the expression of these phase 2 enzymes like glutathione in your colonocytes, right? So byproducts of the microbiome, and these are products that you don't really get from diet, but these are products that are made by the microbiome, are important enhancers of your own cells, like your gut lining cells, your enterocytes, to produce these important phase 2 type enzymes, right? Mm-hmm. So that communication is really important between your microbiome and your own cells. The same thing with things like urolithins, where your microbiome are producing these compounds called urolithins that enhances the mitochondrial function of your own cells, so that your cells have a better metabolic process, not only, of course, to detox, but to make energy, to replicate themselves, to replace damaged cells, all of these important things that should be occurring. Your microbiome is facilitating all that through important signaling.
So interesting. Yeah, so fascinating. And I didn't get everything written in the points of like 1 to 5, but when we do the video, we'll get it more organized and have it on a timeline for people who want to go back to some of these points. So we could talk about this for a long time, but I want to switch gears, and I'm going to ask you a question I think is fun, which is, what do you think is like the most predominant gut distress pattern?
Mm-hmm. Like gut dysfunction
going on today?
Gut dysfunction.
I guess you could say that. Yeah. Okay. Yes. We'll call it
that. Yeah. This to me is quite easy, because when you look at the amount of chronic illness that we have in this country among adults, right? So the CDC data shows that at least 50% of American adults have at least one chronic illness, and upwards of 40% have multiple chronic illnesses, right? 2 or more. So chronic illness is obviously really quite prevalent. And then when you look at the majority of chronic illnesses that we deal with, and then you trace back the pathophysiology, meaning what is driving these chronic illnesses, what are the mechanisms in the body that are driving these chronic illnesses, it becomes quite clear that there are certain types of dysfunctions within the microbiome that are at the root cause of the vast majority of chronic illnesses that we deal with, right? Ones that are seemingly unrelated. So these are things like gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD, and depression, right? You might think for a moment, well, these are completely unrelated because they present completely differently. What is GERD, that's a reflux in your upper GI, have anything to do with how your brain is dealing with mood and emotions and all that in depression, right? Or take another example. What does depression have to do with diabetes? Or what does reflux have to do with lupus, right? These are all very different conditions. However, the mechanism of action of how these conditions start, or at least the environment under which these conditions start, are all exactly the same. And there's a series of lectures I've done at conferences on this particular topic. And it all comes down to two very common microbiota changes in people's guts. Number one is a significant loss of diversity in the modern microbiome, right? So we're losing functional species in our gut every single year with every single generation. And a lot of that is lifestyle related, right? So if you look at our closest living ancestors, so the hunter-gatherer tribes of today still, right, that live very much like our direct ancestors lived even just 500 years ago, 200 years ago. When you look at their microbiomes, they tend to have twice as many organisms in their microbiome as we do, right? Double the species count that we do. And then most recently, an article came out on ancient poop, right, where they found, fossilized, maintained ancient poop, and they did genetic analysis on the ancient poop, and they found huge diversity in the microbiome of ancient human poop. So when we look at the microbiomes of our ancestors, they were much more diverse and complex than our microbiomes. We have lost over time a significant number of species. There's a scary mass extinction going on within the human microbiome, which is the human ecosystem, right? And each generation where we lose more species, we lose critical functionality, right? So imagine the next generation loses the microbes that enhance the production of glutathione in the gut. So then our kids can't undergo phase 2 detox.
Wow.
Right? Which means that all of a sudden the cancer rates in younger kids increase quite dramatically. Just as we've seen ADHD, ADD, spectrum disorders increase quite dramatically. We've seen asthma and immune dysfunctions increase quite dramatically in this current generation than in few generations just past us. And part of that is loss of certain critical functionality. And it all comes back to diversity in the microbiome, our alpha diversity, meaning how many functional organisms do we have in our microbiome. The second part of that, which is also very, very common, is the loss of keystone species, right? These are highly important organisms and maintain the ecosystem in the gut. And then these species also play a direct role in protecting the human host against a number of physiologies that lead to chronic illness. So Akkermansia, Muciniphila, Faecalibacter prosnitzi, Bifidobacterium longum, these are really important keystone species that when their numbers are low, we have a significant increased risk of disease, right? And it's not just a guess anymore. All of these things have 10 years worth of data behind it, right? So very, very significant scientific support for these problems. So those are the two critical things: loss of diversity, loss of keystone species. We have that gut test, the most comprehensive functional microbiome test called Biome Effects, right? We've now run 5,000 plus of those on people. So we now have a lot of data to go through and mine, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing those two highly common features, and because of those two, the rest of the microbiome falls apart, right? Those are like the foundations of the microbiome. And so then right off the bat, if your diversity is compromised and your keystone species are very low or not even present, then the next thing that happens is your gut becomes leaky. And once your gut becomes leaky, then you've set up the pathology of basically every chronic illness.
Okay, perfect. So I think my follow-up question to that is, I mean, you talked about change of lifestyle, but what are the other factors that are leading to these two things happening so much?
Yeah. So a number of things. Number one is a loss of diversity in our diet,
Okay.
right? So diet diversity is directly correlated with the diversity of your microbiome. The more variety of things you eat, the more variety of microbes you tend to feed within your system, and then you start increasing the microbes. At the same time, overeating is a huge issue as well. We need to go through periods of fasting in order for certain groups of microbes within our microbiome to actually enhance their function and expression, right? That's an important part of the life cycle of the microbiome, is you have to go through periods of being fed and periods of fasting. That's naturally how our physiology is designed in many ways. The other thing is loss of connection to the natural environment, right? So for the vast majority of human evolution, we live very intimately with the environment, up with the dirt, with the rivers and streams, and digging for roots and tubers and plucking fruits, wild fruits and vegetables and all that, and eating it with dirt on it and the environment on it. We now live in a pretty sterile environment in our homes, in our offices, in our cars, and we hardly get any interaction with the natural environment. That plays a significant role in reducing the number of organisms we have in and on our system, right? So that's another thing. The other one is, of course, the amazing use of antimicrobials in everything, starting with antibiotics, where at least 50%, and that's probably a very conservative number, at least 50% of antibiotic prescriptions are not necessary. Many of it is a lot of it is prophylactic. A lot of it is written for viral infections, when the antibiotic's not really going to do anything for viral infections. So there's a significant overuse in antibiotics, which of course really kill and wipe out lots of organisms within the system. Then of course we're taking the same antibiotics that have such a detrimental effect on us, and then we're feeding it to the animals that we eat, right? So it's in our food system. And the antibiotics are in our soil, in our drinking water, they're everywhere. Then on top of that, we're spraying antimicrobials on all the foods that we grow. So that's the pesticides and herbicides, things like Roundup. All of those things function as an antimicrobial. And when we consume them and we gain exposure to it, we're dramatically increasing our exposure to antimicrobials or antibiotics into our system, right? So that has a really detrimental effect on the health of our microbiome. We're also heavily stressed, right? And we remain in this elevated state of stress. The way our system is designed, we're designed to be able to have that flight or fight response, which is an important survival mechanism. But once the threat is gone, then we're supposed to be able to calm down. Breathing rate comes down, vasodilation reduces, heart rate comes down, stress hormones come down, and in fact, anti-stress hormones start to increase, and we start to get relaxed, and our breathing becomes shallower and more relaxed, and so on. Nowadays, because of modern society and lots of dysfunction, we are in this elevated stress state for long periods of time, right? And that has a huge detrimental effect on our microbiome, because through the course of evolution, what has happened is opportunistic organisms in our system have learned that when the host is stressed, that's the right time for them, or the right opportunity for them, to start increasing their virulence factors and trying to enhance their own growth, right? These organisms are called opportunistic for a reason, because they look for the right opportunity. And so when they sense stress hormone levels, so they can read our epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol levels, when they see the enhanced level of those stress hormones, they know that the immune system is compromised. So this is their opportunity to succeed. So they start expressing all their genes and trying to grow and take over the system. So continuous stress and even short bouts of stress will actually increase the growth of pathogenic organisms in your system, which will then compete against your commensals and bring their numbers down. So that in itself can be highly transformative for your microbiome.
Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah, I'm writing a book right now about mold, and I'm just writing this whole section about the whole chapter about like prehistoric humans and how they lived compared to now. And then really, like, our bodies really haven't changed, but our lifestyle has changed radically. So if we go back to your list, some of the things, and it's not perfect because again, we get exposed to things sort of without our knowledge and consent nowadays. But eating organic and wild and like from your own garden, great idea. Stress management, choosing to take stressors out of your life, meditating, getting outside, gardening, hiking, fasting, which is really easy. Well, you got to learn it, but once you learn it, it's easy. I know you're a fan. Eating a greater variety of foods. I know you're a fan of like ethnic grocery stores. I'm a big fan of community supported agriculture boxes, and you're getting local and some weird foods you wouldn't eat. I also, when I was researching today, was seeing that certain foods turn on that detox response in the gut as well, which is like why you're not supposed to have grapefruit juice while you take a statin or whatever. Right. But most of it is good in the absence of, medications that we're worrying about. So yeah, a lot of it is sort of simple. And I think it is important to go back to those basics. I want to tell you what I hear is the most common dysfunction, and maybe we can get a little bit more into products, which is people come to us eating, take your time, by eating limited foods because of food sensitivity, dealing with bloating, constipation is rampant, I feel like nowadays, having just like sensitivity to foods. I would say those are the biggest complaints we hear. So how do you go about addressing those ways?
So everything you just described is driven by low diversity and then the subsequent leakiness in the gut, right? So let's take a couple of those and then I'll explain the mechanism of how it happens, right? So let's take food sensitivity as a thing. And there's so many people I meet all the time that used to be able to eat whatever they want when they were younger. Now they're sensitive to so many things, right? So the big question is, why can't I eat this anymore or that anymore? Why is my system so sensitive to it? Well, so what happens is, and I got a nice little diagram here that I can use to explain.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you can see this, right?
Yeah.
I used this before. Okay, so in a healthy gut here, where you've got this strong barrier system, this mucosal barrier system before the gut lining, everything that comes in, including food and all that, comes here through the tube, but this is called the lumen, and then it enters into the mucosa, and in the mucosa it stays where it gets sampled by the immune system. So then your immune system decides whether or not it's going to attack or deal or in some way act egregiously against the food component, right? But since you have a diverse microbiome, you've got a healthy mucosa, when the food particles enter here, your immune system starts to react, but then you've got healthy microbes that turn on something called a Treg system. So then the regulatory T cells come along and then they tell the innate immune cells, hey, this is just a food particle. We don't need to be attacking it, so back off, right? So then your immune system starts to learn that we don't need to attack the food particles that are coming in here. We'll just hang back, and then there's no inflammation, there's no damage, there's no issue. You have what we call, quote unquote, oral tolerance, right? So now your immune system is learning from your microbiome how to tolerate things that are commonly coming into your system that is not harmful to the host, that should not be attacked. Now, when your system looks like this and your gut is completely leaky, then you also have dysbiosis, because this came about because of a loss of diversity and loss of functional organisms, right? So now you have a lot of opportunistic bacteria that are triggering inflammatory responses. And then when food comes in, let's say food enters into the system here, and then it comes through, number one, it's going to just leak through to the inner part of your gut lining towards the intestinal epithelial cells. The moment these cells see the food particles, they will recruit immune cells to that region to start trying to attack those food cells, those food molecules. And because your gut is dysfunctional, your microbiome is dysfunctional, it's not triggering that Treg system, which tells your immune system not to attack the food particles. So over time, you become more and more sensitive as more and more food particles come through here and more often gets attacked by the immune cells that are making their way into this region. You start developing a severe sensitivity to the food. Now you've got an IgE response, you've got an eosinophilic response, or you've got this inflammatory, allergic type of response to the food, because you've got a lot of IgE being produced right at the bottom of the intestinal lining, and you've got a lot of basophils and eosinophils in that area as well. And so when they're triggered because of the inflammation and the lack of the T regulatory cells, every time food comes in, they're kicking up their IgE production, and now you've got a sensitivity or allergy to a food, right? So that's how it develops over time. And again, that's because of the leakiness in the gut, because of the loss of diversity, loss of keystone species, and this dismantling of the gut barrier. Let's talk about constipation. Another thing you mentioned, you said it's quite rampant. Well, when your gut is leaky like that, like I showed you in the diagram, one of the things that leaks through every single day is an endotoxin called LPS, lipopolysaccharide, right? Lipopolysaccharide is made by gram-negative bacteria in your gut. And about 60-something% of the bacteria in your gut are gram-negative. So they all make this lipopolysaccharide. And normally it's fine if your gut's not leaky, if that system is not broken down, it just stays up there in the mucosal layer and eventually moves out through defecation. But what tends to happen when your gut is leaky, that LPS leaks through and ends up in your circulation or ends up in your enteric nervous system, right? So that is the entire lining of your gut is covered with a very dense neurological system called the enteric nervous system. That enteric nervous system is directly connected to your brain through something called the vagus nerve. That LPS toxin will enter into the enteric nervous system. It'll move up the vagus nerve, and it'll lodge itself into an area called the dorsal vagal complex. The dorsal vagal complex, in there, it starts triggering inflammation. What happens when inflammation occurs in the dorsal vagal complex is the signals from the brain that are going down to the gut through the vagus nerve into the enteric nervous system to tells the gut to contract and move, those signals get lost. So now your gut is in stasis and the gut doesn't move. So constipation becomes a very common thing among people with leakiness in the gut, right? And that is a precursor to even scarier things like Parkinson's, right? That's how the process of Parkinson's actually starts too. So everything you described, the bloating, the food intolerances, the constipation, all of those are driven by the most common dysfunctions I mentioned. The low diversity, low keystone strains, which then leads to leakiness in the gut. Everything can be explained by that.
So interesting. I haven't heard this leaky gut, LPS, constipation aspect before. So that's super fascinating.
And to me, that's the biggest driver of SIBO. Why SIBO is becoming so prevalent and so many people are suffering from it. It's because the bowels stop moving as step one in developing SIBO. When the bowel starts moving, then your food is sitting there in your small intestine for longer periods of time. You're getting more fermentation, more putrefaction, and more microbes are overgrowing in the small intestine compared to when the food's allowed to move through at a good pace. And then you've got that electrical sweeping mechanism called the migrating motor complex that comes through and kind of cleans out the bowel. That peristaltic activity in the migrating motor complex stops with leaky gut and LPS being lodged in that dorsal vagal complex.
And then the SIBO develops. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we had some questions a little bit about SIBO too, and that came earlier, but I want to talk about some products. So I'll just tell you that I am being really good about taking my MegaPre capsules. And I'm so happy. It took me a while. They also sell a powder, and I don't know. I wasn't being a good patient. I wasn't taking the powder. I finally tried the capsules, and I created more of a system, and man, it helps me so much. I wake up and have this like nice firm bowel movement. I take it with my MegaSpore, and then I'll have another bowel movement later in the day. And resolving constipation and having bowel movements is so important for detoxification. So a lot of our clients are working on mold toxicity or heavy metals or what have you. If you are not pooping, you are recirculating toxins in a few different ways. And you really want to poop at least a couple times a day, 2-3 times a day when you're detoxifying, which is even rarer to find. So I was just pretty impressed that, I do some other things to keep keep everything moving in my body, so to speak. I'm not really a constipated type. Um, but yeah, this is like an aspect of what I'm doing that I think is really helping have just nice solid bowel movements, and it seems to just help with like regularity.
It does. And two other things that it does, and we published a paper on this. When you combine Megaspore and MegaPre, you get like a 25 to 30% increase in the diversity in your microbiome. So it's doing that, which was one of the fundamental issues that we were talking about. It also dramatically enhances the growth of those keystone species we mentioned, Akkermansia, Fecalum bacteria. And then remember, I mentioned short chain fatty acids and how important they are for upregulating things like glutathione expression and so on. It increases the production of short chain fatty acids by 150%. So you're
Wow.
really producing all of these important microbial compounds that drive the detoxification and the kind of that supporting of better inflammation and all of that pathway. All of that's being done when you combine the Megaspore and the MegaPre.
Yeah, and thinking of hunter-gatherers and like why I think we need to take fiber supplements is like, even if you eat a good diet, food is easy to get now, and you just like, I just don't feel like, I feel like our ancestors had to just kind of, forage and eat a lot, and a lot was super fibrous, and like you said, there was a lot of diversity, and we just, don't get that. Our food is kind of sterile. Sometimes it's even sprayed to be sterile, and we just aren't eating not enough diversity of foods. And I just feel like I'm just not getting in like this 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. I should be. It would be like taking up half my day to like do all that. I mean, I'm eating the best I can with it, but so it's just a nice helper. It's a nice insurance plan. And I've really been trying to encourage people, because we sell like 10 times more of this and this. I'm like, please buy these together. Please buy these together. It helps so much.
And together they are a true symbiotic. So symbiotic is a prebiotic and probiotic combination, but the scientific definition is that one enhances the effect of the other, right? And you have to be able to show that. So we've shown that it almost doubles the effects of the probiotic when you take the prebiotic with it. And keep in mind that these prebiotics are highly focused on oligosaccharides, and oligosaccharides are the foundational prebiotics that our gut microbiome needs. That was our first food when we were born, right? Mother's milk contains over 200 different oligosaccharides, and almost 30% of the mass of mother's milk are these oligosaccharide prebiotics that the baby can't even break down as for energy. Most of it goes to feeding the microbes in our system. So oligosaccharides are so critical, and that's what's those are the key prebiotics in the MegaPre.
So we had a question here. I think it's great to answer. Someone said, well, I'm allergic to corn. It does say contains corn and milk, but my understanding is it's corn husk, so it's not exactly the same kind of allergen. You just kind of say this to be careful, or what's your opinion on?
Yeah, and it doesn't actually contain any corn. That's just the labeling laws. If any active ingredients derive from some component of corn, you should be putting it on there. We don't actually have to, because corn is not one of the big 11 allergens or whatever, but we do because there are people that are concerned about it. So one of the oligosaccharides comes from the middle of the corn cob, right?
Oh,
so it
okay.
has nothing to do with the proteins or the corn, carbohydrates and outside of that, but this is the inner part of the corn cob. And it's a purified oligosaccharide from that. So it doesn't actually have corn in it. It's the prebiotic that comes from the inner part of the corn cob.
Okay, and I would assume similar for milk. It's not
Yeah,
a milk protein. Yeah.
It's not like a casein or a whey or anything in there. What it is there's a galacto-oligosaccharide. Again, it's a prebiotic that is a component of, complex whole milk that they extract from that, and they don't bring any of the proteins in there. It's just purified, just the prebiotic component of it. But again, it's originally derived from milk, so you have to label it, to be transparent.
Yeah, I get that question about some digestive enzymes they derive from mold,
Mhm.
basically, but there's no mold in the enzyme. It's just like the way they grow it. So, but it is confusing. But yeah, I was sort of holding these up and people can't always see. So I'm talking about the MegaSporeBiotic and then the MegaPre, which is a capsule or a fiber. Even though it's meant to not irritate SIBO or bloating, I do have people start low dose because it's a change and you're feeding new bacteria. There's just gonna likely be an adjustment period. So I say start this with dinner and a low dose, because if you take 6 in the morning, you might be feeling it throughout the day. But now I can take it whenever I usually take it with lunch now. It's just sort of
Mm.
my habit. But it's zero bloating for me
Yeah.
now. Going back to SIBO, some people have trouble with certain fibers and also probiotics. And we had a question online about that. Some probiotics seem to irritate some people and not others. But my understanding is Megaspore is pretty strong in the category of like not irritating, causing more bloating. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no mechanism by which it causes any increased issues with SIBO. In fact, it can be absolutely important and supportive for people with SIBO, because remember, one of the biggest original drivers of SIBO is that leakiness in the gut. And that leaky gut, will continue to drive the problem. So you need a probiotic that addresses leaky gut, and that's what Megaspore does. So
Gotcha.
it has to become a very important part of people's SIBO. Because without addressing the leaky gut, you can keep going after the overgrowth with antimicrobials or antibiotics. If your doc is prescribing you rifaximin or whatever, it always comes back. I mean, I have never met anyone that had a successful run at SIBO by just killing the bacteria and then it never came back and they're fine, right? But we keep doing that, which is of
Yeah.
course the definition of insanity, right? But we keep doing that without addressing all the other problems related to SIBO. And some of those other problems are liver health, because we have compromised bile circulation, low stomach acid production, gastroparesis, the lack of emptying of the bowels properly, the stasis, the lack of movement of the bowels, all of these things that come together to create this condition under which SIBO can exist.
Okay, perfect. So we actually had a question online about the liver. So when you said that, I kind of go look that one up because it was interesting. I think he was asking more about the relationship between the liver and the gut and how do they kind of communicate. And he asked about, I don't know if it's a he or she actually, but I asked about certain cells in the liver. One second here. The Kupfer, how do you say it? Cells, macrophages.
Upper, yeah, cells.
Yeah. Do you know anything about the interaction of these two organs?
Sure, yeah, there's something called the gut-liver axis. The gut makes a number of compounds that actually triggers functionality within the liver, triggers the accumulation of the bile acid pool. The gut also can convert bile acids into secondary bile acids, which then has other triggering effects on the liver as well. And of course, dysfunctional gut will cause leakiness and endotoxemia, and that will actually impact the liver significantly, right? So when you look at the most common dysfunctions in the liver now, we're now dealing with things like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, so NAFLD and NASH. These are the big things that are driving end-stage liver failures. It used to be alcoholic cirrhosis and it used to be hepatitis, but now those other two conditions are the primary drivers of liver dysfunction. And what you find is that the microbiome plays a significant role in the formation of those conditions. We've studied the role of the microbiome in hepatoprotection before, and we published a paper on it last year, showing that, and this was in an animal study, you can't do this in humans, but you can give animals, mice, toxic levels of acetaminophen, right? And then that damages their liver significantly because you're giving them that. When you do that with the spores, for example, the damage is significantly reduced. And in fact, in some aspects, you see the damage reversing as well when it comes to liver enzyme expression and so on. So there is that connection between how the gut actually can protect the liver. The liver is the unsung hero within all of the organ systems because it's taking the brunt of all the abuse in your body, and the gut acts as the guard for the liver, right? And if the gut is unhealthy, then your liver is going to get hit with lots of stuff that it can barely deal with. So that's, to me, the most important way to think about the gut liver axis is that the gut is the first pass protection screening against things that end up in the liver. And a dysfunctional gut not only will allow all those things to pass through and end up in the liver, but a dysfunctional gut will also produce additional toxins that become extra toxic to the liver, like endotoxemia.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, and he had some other questions. Does anybody live have some questions they want to ask? Maybe I'll talk about a couple. I don't have the IgG handy, but this is the MegaMucosa, which is also a powder, and I like this one for constipation. I mean, that's maybe not its primary usage. It's more to build the mucosal layer that we've chatted about here. But maybe you can talk about how you designed it, Kiran. And yeah, I think it's very smoothing and soothing is kind of how I describe it. So if you do have food sensitivities, if things are a little slow or your bowel movements are sort of strained, it just seems to help smooth that out from a clinical sense.
Yeah, it's our second best-selling product to all our docs globally. So MegaSpore is of course the first, and the MegaMucosa is the second, and the MegaPre is actually the third. And MegaMucosa and MegaPre are kind of close, but MegaMucosa is a little bit more. So that just tells you from repeated use, what all our docs that we service, what they really seem to like and gravitate towards. The whole idea behind MegaMucosa is about supporting that mucosal layer that I talked about. And that mucosal layer that becomes dysfunctional and damaged and broken apart, and that's what allows the leakiness to occur. That part is so critical, and your entire inside of your body is covered with that mucosal layer. The GI tract contains a lot of it, but other parts of your body also contain mucosal layers. And the GI tract is like the central command center for all of these other mucosal layers. And so the supporting of the GI mucosa becomes absolutely critical. And we did it in a few ways. One is all of the mucosal layers are made up of glycoproteins, right? So these are amino acids or proteins with a sugar component to it. So it makes this kind of viscous gel-like structure. The 4 key amino acids that rebuild the mucosa, these are the building blocks of the mucosa. Studies have shown that when you add these 4 key amino acids, it enhances the regrowth of the mucosa by like 95%. So we put those 4 key amino acids in there because it's really hard to know from your normal diet if you're getting adequate amounts of those 4 amino acids. So we put that in there to make it simple to ensure that the building blocks of the mucosa are there. We also added in a polyphenol that's really important because the polyphenols improve the immune response in the mucosa, which a dysfunctional immune response in the mucosa can damage the mucosa. It also enhances the growth of one of the keystone species called Akkermansia. And Akkermansia helps stimulate new mucosal development as well. We also put immunoglobulin G, the bovine immunoglobulin, in there just to reduce the toxigenic load on the mucosa. And studies on patients that have conditions where the mucosa is physically damaged by aberrant immune responses and so on, show that when you have that immunoglobulin, it actually enhances the restructuring of the mucosa itself. So those are the components in the MegaMucosa, and that plays a really important role in trying to reestablish and maintain that really important barrier structure.
Yeah. And we just had a question on the Q&A about diarrhea, and again, kind of clinically, I don't have it with me. I barely made it here. I just wrote an article comparing the two. I did a video on them. To me, clinically, with symptoms, this is stronger for kind of constipation, food sensitivities, and the Mega IgG is stronger for diarrhea and infections. Even if you don't know you have an infection, that's sort of my one side effect that I kind of warn people about with Mega IgG is it may slow things down for you and take it opposite of the fiber. Take it in the morning, I find is better, and lower dose. I think you guys say dose is 4, but it's a strong product and not everybody's going to need 4. So just depending on your situation, if it's stopping you up too much. But I think that was Gail.
And we also say to reduce that slowing down of the bowel when you're taking the IgG, to increase your water intake. That makes a big difference. So if you're starting with 4, just make sure you're drinking at least another additional glass or 2 of water a day. And that helps a lot. And the IgG, you know, like you talked about having some sort of infection that may be going on, you talk a lot about mold as well. One of the things that the IgG does bind up are a whole array of mold toxins. So aflatoxin and so on, all of these mycotoxins that we get exposed to, or we might have actually being produced in our GI tract, the IgG binds the mold toxins as well. So it does improve the detoxification and reduces the toxigenic load in the system.
Yeah, IgG is great for cleaning up sort of any kind of naturally made toxins, I guess you could say. But I think it also is enhancing some of that communication we talked about with the liver and the liver enzymes. I am actually wanting to develop, and I'm kind of already working on it, a binder that is more of a probiotic yeast herbal thing for mold. So maybe we should talk.
We should, yeah.
Yeah, because I was looking at binders a lot, and it's a very, you know, growing field and and I was like, there's so much like differing opinions and this and that. And I thought, well, you know what, one thing we know for sure that isn't really being that angle isn't really being taken is that mold is addressed in other ways as well, with NAC and with Saccharomyces is a product you carry. So I love your idea with the heavy metals binder, because a lot of times in the detox world, people are taking stuff that's too harsh for their tolerance. So if we can use agents that are more gentle, that's fantastic. So
totally. And I want to say hi to Gail, because Gail sent a message that we've met before. So Gail, thank you for being here and watching.
Yeah, she's been following you for a while. What did she say? The Human Longevity Project. Yeah, that was a while ago. Cool. So Barbara was asking, do people have many sensitivities? Binders, we were just kind of saying binders about Barbara. Yeah, binders people can react to. It just depends on the person and the amount. Do many people get reactions? I would say not. But I will say if you're quite dysbiotic, even just starting on MegaSpore can make you have some loose stool or bloating or, you know, a little rash. Just, you know, you're basically creating some die-off. So some people have to go incredibly slowly. It's not the majority, though. I'm trying to think. The only, I guess, side effect I've ever had from one of your products is if I take, you know, the Mega Guard can give me like a little feeling of heartburn because it has like peppermint in it. So if I took that like after a meal instead of before, it's not even really hardly a side effect, but it's literally the only thing. Yeah, and the Mega IgG will kind of slow me down. But I was like, I think Gail asked it, like I was more of a loose stool type for a long time, and I was living in a moldy home, not totally coincidentally. So for me, slowing down, I almost just saw as like, oh, my body is like changing its microbiome. Like this is good. We just have to adjust. So
totally, yeah. And you know, any kind of change in the microbiome, even all the positive changes, may present with symptoms that aren't comfortable at the moment, right? So it doesn't actually mean it's bad or in any way. So that's just something we have to manage through, because, you know, some of these products can make some dramatic changes in your microbiome, which is a good.
These are professional grade products. They're only sold through practitioners or through microbiome labs directly because they're strong. And we have, I'll put it here in the chat, a whole guide to side effects. I mentioned the fiber could get you a little bloated in the beginning if you're not used to it. I know for me, and I see it with my clients, like we have an emotional reaction to having side effects. But once I wrote this guide, I was like, there's really just like 5 side effects really that I ever see with anything. And it's usually just like lowering the dose or drinking more water or something small. It's usually, bloating, changes in bowel movements, inflammation.
Yeah.
It's a pretty short list. And like you said, it's because there's real change happening. So I'd rather people notice a little something than spend their money and
Nothing.
have nothing happen, which is what happens quite a bit. So yeah, well, I think we covered quite a bit of ground in a surprisingly short amount of time for us too. Anybody else have any questions, or Kiran, any other topics you want to cover, products you want to highlight?
I'll just mention a couple that we have coming out in the very near future. Of course, our Good Biome foods, which are the first kind of microbiome friendly specific foods that we've created.
Wait a second. You're creating foods?
Yeah, we are.
I hadn't heard about this.
This is and it should be coming out next month. So
okay.
And the idea here is that in working with all of the practitioners and doctors that we work with, right, we know ultimately the thing that influences a people's microbiome the most is what foods they eat. And that's perhaps the hardest part to control with your patients, clients, and so on, because that's completely their choice, right? So once they leave the clinic or they leave your meeting, they might have supplements that they can take that will help and enhance, but then they're making the food choices on their own. So what we wanted to do was take some of that guesswork out and produce foods that were not only convenient, good, delicious to eat and all that, but were quantifiably good for your microbiome. So you can use food more like medicine. The old adage of, let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. So you can be prescriptive in the sense where you could say, eat this muffin, which is an instant muffin. You just open the packet, you put it in a mug, you add a little bit of water, you microwave it for a minute or put it in the oven for a few minutes, and it becomes a full muffin. And you could eat that muffin every day for 2-3 weeks, and it'll increase the diversity of your microbiome by like 25%. Right. So and we have all of that data. We've been doing studies on it to figure out how does this food product enhance features of the microbiome. So the whole idea behind that is to take at least one of the decisions and throughout the day of what you're going to eat and make it one that is specifically good for your microbiome, right? That you don't have to think about. So Good Biome Foods is launching with 3 different products. 2 of them are muffins, again, instant muffins that you can make in a mug. And the third one is what we call a mookie, which is actually a cookie that you can make in a mug as well. So it's a mug cookie. All of these you can also make in an oven if you prefer that, or if you don't have a microwave, like some people don't. And so that's launching in about a month. Now, a month after that, we're launching what we're extremely excited about, which is a gut brain product. Now through our partnership with Novozymes, which is a Denmark human health technology company, we have access to some strains that are mind-boggling strains. One of the strains I mentioned earlier was one that we're launching that will bind up heavy metals, right, and take it out of the body. So that's one of the strains that come from our partnership with Novozymes. Another one is a species. It's a Bifidobacterium longum, and it has a special exopolysaccharide around it. And they have a bunch of clinical trials, and this is from the globally top gut-brain research institute called the APC in Cork, Ireland. They have a bunch of published studies showing that it dramatically reduces cortisol and stress hormones and dramatically improves your ability to deal and manage with stress.
Wow.
Right? And this is daily, day-to-day stress. And then at the end of the night, when you take another version of it, it dramatically enhances sleep. So the time to sleep reduces, so how long it takes you to fall asleep. The quality of sleep dramatically improves as we've done through a bunch of sleep studies that are being published. And then also brainwave function changes, right? So there's the alpha, delta, beta waves and all that. The flow state that everyone wants to be in, that relaxed, highly focused state, it's called a theta wave state. And the probiotic actually enhances theta wave function in the body, in the brain. So there's all of this dynamic shift in the brain that is occurring through stuff that's occurring in the gut. And it's all through various inflammatory pathways and so on that impact the brain, right? So that is called Zen Biome. And there's 2 versions of that. Zen Biome Cope, that's for daily stress and stress management. And then Zen Biome Sleep, which is one that enhances the sleep function as well. So those are two very exciting categories of products coming out, which when you add to the bevy of things that we already have, it really provides support in so many of the critical areas that people need help in, especially coming off this, crazy pandemic and all the stuff that we've all gone through. Stress, anxiety, all of that is through the roof right now. So we need all the help we can get.
I'm super excited about those products. Those are probably two of my biggest complaints. And yeah, like I feel like I spend a good portion of my day like meditating, working on managing stress. Because I think once, you've been in the situation that got you into chronic stress, it's gonna be really hard to turn it off, even when you know you want it off. It's like the body's like, we got to protect ourselves though. So I love the sound of those. I think the foods are really fun. People get tired of taking supplements, let's be honest. So I love diversity, liquids and gels and topicals. And this is a really fun idea as well. What did you say? Oh, later you're doing the binder for the heavy metals.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we have one that'll be binding things like lead and arsenic and cadmium and all that, because we get a surprising amount of heavy metals in our food, right? That
we do.
report, right, just came out on all of these high-end baby foods, these organic, super clean baby foods that have 177 times the amount of lead that the EPA would even allow. And so we're feeding ourselves a ton of heavy metals, and it's coming through our water. Something like 30% of the population in the US still live in buildings and areas where they're using lead pipes, right? So we're still getting all of the lead from exposure from that. It's lowering IQ in our kids. It's completely compromising cognitive development. So it's a major issue that we don't even think about, because most of us don't think that lead is an issue in the middle class and upper middle class areas that most people live in, right? But it is. It's coming in through our food. It's coming in through our water, and it has a huge impact on us, and it has a huge impact on our kids. So we've got this probiotic that you take with your food and drink, and it just binds up all the heavy metals and takes it out.
Oh, yeah. Barbara, the Mega IgG is a bunch of a high dose of immunoglobulins that are bovine derived, and there's some other things too. So it's sort of like instant enhancement for your gut immune system is what I call it. So it's great for infections and kind of diarrhea, like we mentioned. I was at a conference recently, Kiran, and a woman, I think it was thallium, she talked about. So she actually lives here in Arizona. She's a naturopath. Her hair was falling out, all this crazy stuff was happening, and she eats like perfect, green smoothies, kale, and all. So she worked really hard. Oh, and then she got her heavy metals tested, and this one was through the roof, and she worked really hard to figure it out. And in California, even with organic kale, they are allowed to use the wastewater from fracking to water organic kale. And then they can still call it organic because they didn't spray it with pesticide. Like, it is mind-blowing. So we're gonna write that up in a blog soon, because it's just like, you don't think, even when we sort of know about this health world, you still think, but I'm mostly protected here in the great United States. Like, you don't know. I just bought a big water filter for the house, and I really should have tested the water first, but it all gets so expensive. The filter itself is expensive, and then get someone to install it. But that's really the only way to know really what's in your water, because the government reports are pretty limited. They don't cover a lot of the other things in the water. So I don't mean to scare people, but this is why we're researching and coming up with new products and educating, so that you don't accidentally eat a bunch of organic kale and your hair falls out.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. We're trying to do the right thing, right? We're making the right choice. Like, if you think about the baby food issue, right? You've got a baby, and you're buying your baby the highest end organic foods, like Beech Nut and all these high end brands that were all named in that congressional report. And here you are thinking you're doing the absolute right thing, and you're feeding your baby 150 times the amount of lead that is deemed to be, minimally tolerable, right? And according to the American Pediatric Association, no amount of lead is tolerable. So this is like beyond the EPA levels, which is actually in contention against the American Pediatric Association levels. So we're feeding our kids all of this heavy metal stuff, but we're intending to do the right thing, and we're spending extra money on the high-end stuff. So you just don't know, it's just so hard to understand and know and analyze and test everything that you're putting into your system. We have to make certain assumptions that if we're going organic and we're going high-end or this and that, we're eating cleaner things, but we don't know that, right? And so for us, a lot of it comes down to, okay, if you don't know all of that, then what are some of the things you can do at the level of your digestion to protect yourself from those things, right? From heavy metals coming in, from toxins coming in, and so on.
Well, yeah, most of it, again, coming through your mouth, really. So, and that's your specialty. Yeah, and my specialty too, it's like, people say, well, do I really need to detox? My body already does that. Or if I say this about organic food, well, why bother? I might as well just buy whatever. It's like, yeah, it is everywhere. That doesn't mean you just give up. It means you use your sauna. It means you use your dry brush. It means you get out in nature. Like, it's not impossible to support your detox systems, and just assume you're being exposed to toxins because you are.
You are. Yeah.
You really are. So I think it's just a part of modern life that we need to consider detox. It's just part of our routine. And we've really learned about how the gut is an important part of that today, some tools to do it. We didn't cover every single product, but if you want to write our customer service with a question, or you want to direct message me on Instagram, I'm really responsive there to just ask me about your case. I'm happy to help. I put the link to all the Microbiome Labs products in there. The only thing I'm disappointed about, Kiran, is your stuff doesn't get me called Mega anymore. Very confusing for me. I'll just call it Mega Zen Biome.
That's it. We tried to figure out a Mega Zen of some sort. Every trademark is taken with anything having to do with Zen and Mega. Crazy.
Yeah, I've just been working on trademarks too, and sleep is a real tough one to come up with an original name. So congratulations, though. It's super exciting. We'll have to have you back on if you have time to talk about some of the
and when I come on, what I'd like to talk about, what you mentioned earlier is like the situation of conditions that got you into this overtly stressed, kind of anxious state, and then why it's so hard to get out of that, right? So I love that. I can go through the physiology of why you get stuck in that phase. And there's a clear gut-brain connection, and it's all driven by different types of inflammatory pathways, including things like microglial activation and so on that we can go through. And then how this kind of probiotic actually arrests that cycle and stops that perpetuating cycle. And that's a really important part. That's part of why this works so amazingly well, and why the studies are so compelling and so on. It's the studies are being published in some of the top psychiatric journals out there on this product. And remember, the studies are being done at APC, which is the gold standard globally of gut-brain institutes. So this is not something that we're testing in small levels. This is being done at the highest level of scientific evidence. So it's super exciting, and it's so needed, and it's going to be such a game changer for a lot of people. So I'm really, really excited about it. And
I'm super excited.
We'll be launching it probably in July. And so we could come on sometime in August or something like that.
I'll book it, and and everybody has their own triggers, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm special, but I went through mold, and then moving and divorce and moving again, and then I got a really bad concussion in the fall. I don't know if I told you about it. It's just like, my body is, it's so sick. And sometimes I can break free and be in like the flow state, but sometimes I'm like, man, do I have to work on this like 2-3 hours a day? Like, I don't have time. I just want to be it. And sometimes I think that switch goes back to flow, but it's still hard. So I'd love to hear your insight on sort of why we get stuck and shortcuts to getting unstuck.
So, we'll get you back in the flow state.
I love it. I'm gonna pay extra to be the first bottle. First lot. Okay, well, thank you so much, Kiran. We always appreciate your time, and thanks to people who are on, and we will have replay on YouTube, and we'll also send it out to our list. And then the code is MegaMe to try any product. And we also have a 30-day, money back return policy. So again, you can pretty much modify anything by slowing down, reading our side effects guide, but I want you to feel good about what you take. So reach out to us, give something a try risk-free. And yeah, they're our number one sellers. Our actually number two seller is Mega IgG. Interesting.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, but yes, they're definitely our top selling products. So I think you guys will love them if you haven't used them. So thanks, everybody.